Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with dry-aged prime rib. That's right, I dry-aged a prime rib for over 40 days and 40 nights, and I could hardly believe what happened. Or should I say what didn't happen? Okay, the results were surprising, a little bit confusing, but very interesting. But anyway, I don't want to spoil the ending. Although I will say, if you've ever thought about dry-aging your own prime rib, you really should watch this video first. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing you're going to need, of course, is a prime rib. And this beautiful specimen weighed in at about 10 pounds. And not only do we want to make sure there's still a fair amount of fat on top, but we definitely also want to make sure we use a prime rib that has the bones attached. And speaking of attached, I'm going to go ahead and detach whatever that is right there. And then the only thing we're going to do before we put this on our drying rack is go ahead and quickly clean the surface with a little bit of salted water. Okay, I just dissolved like a spoon of salt in a cup of water, and we will use that to wipe down the surface. Okay, some people like to rinse this under running water and then pat it dry, and then others will actually dip it in a brine. But I think this quick wipe down with a saline solution is more than adequate. And that's it. Besides some clean beef, the only other thing we're going to need here is some kind of tray and rack to put it on, which for me will just be a sheet pan with this roasting rack. And then before we rack our beef, I'm going to put some salt down on the tray first. Okay, some regular sea salt plus some pink Himalayan salt. And people that know things about this stuff say that that will help control the humidity and purify the air, whatever that means. But you know what? It looks cool, it feels right, plus the best dry-aged beef I've ever had was in Chicago, and it was actually aged in a room that was lined with this pink salt. But anyway, you decide. I mean, you are, after all, the Barry Gibb of your dry-aged prime rib. And I really don't think there's going to be that much of an effect on whether the bacteria in your refrigerator is going to be staying alive. Staying alive. And that's it. Once we have our beef panned up, we can head to our hopefully dedicated fridge. Okay, I'm doing this in my empty spare fridge in the garage, which really will make this whole operation a lot easier than trying to do it in your regular fridge, that you're going to be opening and closing a million times. And what we'll do is leave it in this fridge from anywhere between 30 and 45 days. Okay, they say in less than 30 days not much happens, and after 45 days maybe too much happens. And by the way, the temperature of your fridge is critical. Okay, we really want to maintain a temperature between 34 and 38 degrees. And so that I wasn't guessing, I used this probe thermometer that I have dangling somewhere near the meat in the middle of the fridge. And this is actually what my prime rib looked like after 2 weeks of aging. All right, it was getting dark, it was getting dry, but happily there was nothing dangerous looking growing on the outside. Oh, and I should mention, a lot of people recommend you have a fan in your fridge, but I don't have a fridge fan, or a fan to put in my fridge, and that didn't seem to cause any problems. But anyway, that's what it looked like after 2 weeks. And this is what it looked like after 6 weeks, when I finally pulled it out. Okay, it was even darker and even drier, and it had a very subtle, pleasantly funky smell. So I was feeling pretty good, except I did not want to do what is traditionally the next step, and that would be trimming all the hard, dry surface off until we get down to that nice, soft, fresh meat. All right, I was okay trimming off a little bit of the fat, since I'm not going to eat all of that anyway. But I really did not want to trim any of the meat away. I mean, sure, it was super hard and almost black, but I thought that might be the best tasting part. Although I was thinking, is that safe to eat? So I decided to do an experiment. Okay, I was going to slice a little piece off the side so that I could cook it and test it. Okay, sure, I'm a chef, but I'm also a horribly undereducated scientist. So I cut a little piece off the end that was mostly fat. And it was funny, even though it was dark, the meat underneath really did feel like fresh meat, whereas the other side felt and looked like a cross between beef jerky and leather. But anyway, like I said, I went ahead and trimmed that up, and then seasoned it with a little bit of salt, after which I quickly pan-fried it. And what I was thinking was I would eat this piece, and if I didn't get horribly ill, I would know it was okay not to trim all that stuff off. And yes, I have to admit, as I cut into this, I was a little bit scared, because it's not every day you eat a piece of medium rare meat attached to black hard meat. And if you're wondering what this tasted like, I'm not going to tell you. Okay, we're going to save the flavor review for the end. But texturally, I determined it was very edible, and I'm happy to report I survived this experience with no adverse effects at all. So I did go back to trim off a little bit of the fat, in any areas I thought were even remotely suspicious looking. But as you will see from my pile of scraps, I really didn't trim off any of the meat at all. Which is good, because this thing lost like 2 pounds of weight during the dry aging process, which at $20 a pound Means I lost like $40 into the atmosphere. But anyway, like I said, I went ahead and did the minimal amount of trimming. At which point we'll go ahead and transfer that back onto our rack, only this time it's in a roasting pan. And then once that's set, we're going to have to generously season this with salt. And to help us do that, we'll go ahead and spray the surface with water so that the salt sticks. Okay, otherwise that surface is so dry and slick, the salt really is not going to hold on. So I gave that a spray all over before very, very generously seasoning this with kosher salt. Okay, this is a big hunk of meat, so you almost can't put too much salt on the surface. And that's it. Once we have that surface covered with salt, finally, after 6 weeks, we can cook this in 1 or 2 more days. Since we really do want to give this meat enough time to pull some of that salt from the surface in. So I went ahead and popped mine in the fridge for 24 hours, but 48 hours is probably even better. At which point we can pull it back out, and yes, finally we can cook it in a couple hours. All right, we don't want to put a roast this big into the oven ice cold. So we'll just leave that on the countertop, covered up in case there's any curious critters flying around. And we'll let it sit there warming up a little bit. At which point, finally, no more sykes, we're going to put this in the oven. And because I'm going to use a traditional roasting method, I'm going to use this probe thermometer so we get it perfect. And of course, we want to place that right in the center. And then what we're going to do here is use the old 500-300 method, which means we sear this in a really hot 500-degree oven for 20 minutes, and then reduce our heat down to 300 until it's cooked to our liking, which for me was supposed to be about 125 to 130 internal temp. But funny story, the probe thermometer I used could not take the 500-degree temperature, and unbeknownst to me, stopped working. But luckily, I figured that out just in the nick of time, and even though this went up to more like 135, I still was okay. So you probably don't want to stick in your thermometer until your oven temperatures come down to 300. But anyway, all's well that ends well. And I went ahead and let that rest for about 30 minutes before slicing in, which by the way is highly recommended. Or I do not pull these right out of the oven and cut straight in. And even though I accidentally cooked this closer to medium, it was still absolutely gorgeous and juicy, and still beautifully pink. And I could not wait to grab a fork and knife and start eating. And by eating, I mean analyzing. So I went ahead and plated up a giant portion. Alright, usually it's 1 bone for 2 portions, but not for me today. And because I wanted to focus on the flavor, I did not serve this with any fancy sauces. Although I do have something of a horseradish fetish. So I did serve a little bit of horseradish cream on the side for the later bites. But anyway, I went ahead and dug in, and it really was incredible. Just extremely juicy and tender. And I absolutely loved everything about it except the taste. Or lack thereof. And what I mean by that is that this tasted just like really good beef, but it really didn't have any of that funkiness that one would expect after dry aging beef for 6 weeks. Okay, for me that really is the single most important reason you would do this. So while this really was delicious, I cannot honestly say it tasted that much different than just a regular old prime rib we threw in the oven and roasted. And I even tried that outer crust by itself, because that should have a stronger flavor, but it didn't. Now, having said that, I do think the aging helped make this a little more tender. And because we lost 2 pounds of weight, I do think the flavor concentrates a little more. But it just concentrated that regular beefy flavor, and not that kind of extra flavorful cheesy funkiness I really wanted. And if I'm going to wait for 6 weeks, and basically lose $40 worth of product through evaporation, is something that's a little more tender and a little more beefy worth it. And I even tried a little bit of extra salt to see if that would bring it out, but it didn't. So to summarize, I really don't know. I mean, I guess if you have the budget and the extra fridge, give it a try. Maybe yours will be funkier. Okay, maybe we should have left it longer. But I do have to say the results were inconclusive. So I can't officially say I really do hope you give this a try soon. But what I will still say is head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.